Well, let's find out more about Refill Isle of Man. We're joined in the studio by the island's Environment Minister Geoffrey Boot MHK, the department member with responsibility for reducing single-use plastics, Martyn Perkins MHK, and Joe Overty, who's the island's UNESCO Biosphere Project Officer. And we'll talk more about what that means in just a moment. But first, Mr Boot, how do we get involved with this Refill project?
It's quite easy, really. There's two sides to it. As a member of the public or a visitor to the island, you've got a plastic bottle and you want a refill. Well, you look for one of the signs. It's going to be fairly prominent. We've already got 45 partners signed up, and there'll be a lot more over the next few weeks. You go in and ask for a refill, and it's tap water. Absolutely good tap water, I have to say. The Isle of Man has some of the best in the world, according to Mr Perkins,
That's certainly
my colleague. And you reuse your plastic bottles. And from the other side of the equation, if you want to be involved in the scheme as a trader or a business, then you speak to Joe Overty, sitting next to me, and become part of the refill scheme.
And Joe, we've heard that 45 businesses have already signed up. How easy is it for people to get involved?
We want to make it as simple as possible. We ask people to contact us. They need to fill in a very quick form so that we can hold their data for GDPR purposes, which is obviously very important these days. We capture some very brief information about their business, such as their postcode and their opening hours and any details of where specifically within their business we can go to refill. We send out a welcome pack, including a sticker, or on some occasions we hand deliver it. And you put the sticker up in the window, we put you on the app, and you are a refill station.
And in terms of requirements that businesses have to meet in order to be part of this scheme, how onerous is that?
Not at all. We want to make it as inclusive as possible to try and cut down on the amount of plastic bottles that are sold in the Isle of Man. The Refill national statistics say that the average adult purchases 3 plastic bottles a week. I don't know what the average adult is, and I don't think many people are purchasing plastic bottles anymore. I think it's becoming completely unfashionable to do that. But the idea is to have a scheme that's accessible as possible. You simply need to have to be open to the public. So the scheme suits, shops and cafes and restaurants and museums and businesses like that who already have footfall through. You need to have a tap that isn't outside over a drain or in a loo. And certain criteria, if you have a mixer tap that you just have to let the tap run, you ask the person presenting the bottle to take the lid off, you fill it up for them, and they go about their business, and you've helped change the world in a small way.
Which is amazing. Is there something to be said then for this potentially rolling out into something even more island-wide, so that it's not necessarily having to go into businesses, but perhaps we can have like water fountains and things?
I think it's fair to say that in government we're looking at that, and it'd be a good idea to have water fountains in all our schools and in all public places. I mean, when I was a youngster, we didn't have plastic bottles in schools. We had a drinking fountain, or we had glasses when we had our lunch, and nowadays that seems to have changed completely. So, and youngsters are so interested in the environment that I think we can change that. But a fountain at the airport would be good, the sea terminal.
We've already got a fountain in Castletown, haven't we? It's a public drinking fountain, and I think there's one in Peel that's being refurbished. So, yeah, the government's actually moving in the right direction in that
Yeah, there is one on the seafront, isn't there, in Peel? That's right.
I use that every time I walk past it, I have a little drink. Yeah.
Martyn Perkins, the issue of bottles in schools is an interesting one, because there was a Freedom of Information request which revealed schools' plastic habits earlier this month, and Ballacameen sells more plastic water bottles than any other secondary school in the island. I know one of the schools, I think it's QE2, doesn't actually have a water fountain. How do you change that sort of mentality then?
I think it's the same as we do with everybody else, and it's key that we get the children involved right from the start. Laxey School actually got themselves organised right at the very beginning, before the refill thing got underway, and they recognised that the school should do a refill system, and I think other schools will follow suit, especially with the publicity on the refill programme.
And it is important, isn't it, that we lead by example in situations like this. And I think, Mr Perkins, January in particular is a really important month for the government themselves, actually, with regards to plastic strategy.
Yeah, it is. Back in June, the government voted that we should have a plastic strategy, eliminate a lot of the single-use plastic that we use, stirring teaspoons and plastic cups and all the disposable stuff that we all used to take for granted. And we're having a good think on that. We've got champions within each department now. We're doing audits on how we can improve and go to other uses, other stuff, bamboo, for example, other recyclable stuff, and that is well underway now, yeah.
An interesting question just popped up here. Do plastic bottles really matter in the Isle of Man when we have a fantastic energy from waste plant which generates electricity from high energy waste such as polymers?
Well, that's a very good question, and the feeling is that it's better to dispose of plastic in the energy from waste plant and actually get some electricity generated from it rather than finding its way into landfill and then by default probably into the sea.
But we should also go further down the line, because plastic is a resource and it has to be manufactured somewhere. So there's a carbon footprint for every bottle that you use. And if we can go further down the line and eliminate that helps the environment generally. But the energy for waste plant, as Martyn said, is a great facility for the island and asset.
And Joe, this initiative, I believe, came about from an existing programme which has already been sort of pushed out across the UK at least, hasn't it? How did we actually come to be involved with Refill?
It was actually the suggestion of a local artist called Jenny Gross, or Jenny Wood, I think her name is now, who approached us last year through UNESCO Biosphere Isle of Man, which is the project that I manage. And she gave us some details. We looked into it. We sort of Manxified it a little bit. And that's where we are now. We did look at having our own Manx version of it, but we felt that it was very important. We are a visitor destination, and the Refill sign, although Refill itself was only sort of initiated in 2015, the sign is instantly recognisable. There is an app, which is very important in this day and age, and we kind of felt that this, something that locals and visitors alike would recognise would be the best way to go.
That's a great idea, actually, because you don't want it to be totally island-centric. You need to be part, I suppose, of a bigger movement.
People come over here for leisure purposes, and we want them to be out exploring our hills and, walking and cycling and doing all the other amazing things they can do here. And it's important for health and well-being that they fill it with water on the way. If people start to recognise it, that would be great.
And how good are we as an island at actually fulfilling these sort of pledges and promises initiatives? Because, of course, we've been looking at it with plastic bags, haven't we? And having the sort of bags for life and ensuring that that's a big thing. As an island, do we buy into this enough? Because I know you do often see people still saying, oh, I forgot my bag, I'll just take one of yours. And how easy is it to get people to do this sort of thing?
I think you only have to look at Beach Buddies and how that has captured the imagination. And whole families are going out. And I know on Laxey Beach, they were fighting over who found what bit of plastic, because everybody is so keen up to it. And I think that if you can get the youngsters involved, then they persuade mum and dad to come along and look forward for the future.
I think that the people are buying in. Even before we launched the scheme, there were some people that had joined the scheme in the UK independently. So there's an appetite for this sort of thing. And when it comes to plastic bags, I've been under a lot of pressure to bring in legislation to follow or mimic what's been happening in the UK. But actually, a lot of the businesses have fallen into line voluntarily, and we try and monitor what they're doing. And I think that shows a great commitment to the environment on Ireland.
And with regards to things like paying for plastic bags, I mean, that's all well and good, but you want to know that the money generated from those sales actually goes into something environmental and worthwhile.
Well, we've been trying to sort of audit that, and I've answered questions in the Keys and Tinmore about just that subject. And most of the major businesses, all the major businesses, reinvest that money on Ireland to good projects. So I'm quite confident that the money's being used properly.
I want to talk a little bit more about UNESCO Biosphere Isle of Man, Joe, because this is something that I think we hear about a lot. I think we were awarded this status back in 2016. But in layman's terms, what does it actually mean?
Perhaps I'll take you back to 1945 if we have time.
Were you around then?
Not quite. UNESCO itself came about after the dark days of World War II to sort of foster collaboration and understanding across a troubled world. And lots of projects were born within UNESCO, perhaps most famously World Heritage Sites, which I'm sure everybody's heard of. That's the sort of flagship one, and there are 1,080 or something of those. Biosphere is a lesser known programme, but it's essentially about connecting people up with nature in the modern world. And a good modern biosphere gets the combination right between people and environment. So everything isn't concreted over, everything isn't preserved in aspic. It's about people living their lives in a modern environment and how they make that connection.
And how do we ensure that we keep that status?
We were fortunate enough to be granted it in 2016, as you say, after quite a lengthy sort of application process. We needed two essential components. We needed some special habitats in terms of places like the Ayers and the Calf of Man and our ASSIs and our nature reserves. And we needed people to be a living, breathing biosphere reserve. We are reaccredited every 10 years, so that process will happen in 2016. It's a celebration of what we are already, but there's no room for complacency, and we see it very much as a platform to work together across our community to bring about greater sustainability in the Isle of Man.
So what does that actually mean then for just Joe Public?
So getting everyone on board and protecting what we have, celebrating what we have, being aware, a little bit more aware of what we have. I think one of the great things that Biosphere brings is a sense of place. We are what we were in the past, our heritage, our farming, our fisheries, everything that we've grown up to be. Our culture is a very important aspect of it, has led us to be what we are today. We have this amazingly enviable landscape and seascape out there with our marine nature reserves, and it's about connecting people, but helping them to sustain it and helping them to take an interest in the future of it.
And I think it's also important to say that we are the only nation that has complete biosphere status, and I think that's a great accolade. In the last few months we've had two people over from UNESCO. They weren't coming over to check on us, they came over by invitation to have a look at where we are, because we're a young biosphere and we're learning all the time. And I think the overall impression was that we're doing a really good job at the moment, stay on track, and I think from feedback we've got that we will have no problem in renewing in another 8 or 7.5 years' time.
We are talking about the refill, which is now active, isn't it, Joe, here on the Isle of Man?
We launched last Monday.
And we've got a question asking, I take it as part of this incentive, the government will be removing the water dispensers in various government departments along with the single-use cups. Martyn, does that come under your remit?
Yeah, I believe that's underway at the moment, and there will be actual taps connected up purposely for people to refill.
So essentially what it means now is that people can take out their water bottle, they can go anywhere which has got one of these stickers, Joe, and just go and get their bottle filled up free of charge.
Absolutely. And, obviously, ideally, they will be using a more sustainable cup or drinking vessel of some description anyway, rather than a single-use plastic bottle. But even if they do take in a single-use plastic bottle, that is better than them disposing of that single-use plastic bottle and buying another one to continue their journey, running, walking, cycling, whatever they're actually doing at the time.
And I noticed on the sort of nationwide site, the refill site, there was a mention of an app. Is that something that we're taking part in as well?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so we are loading all of our new refill stations, as they're called, onto the app. It takes about 24 hours to get them onto the app when you sign up, but we have more than 50 already. And then people out and about, head down using their mobile phone, as we all are these days, can quickly find out when they're in range of a refill station. They can tap to say that they've used a refill station, and they can tweet it, and probably all sorts of other clever stuff that I haven't figured out how to do yet. But obviously, if you're just walking down the high street and you don't have access to the app, you will hopefully come to recognise the symbol and know that that's a place that you can just pop into and refill your water bottle. And of course, many places in the Isle of Man would already happily refill an empty drinking vessel. But it can be hard to ask, can't it? You're queuing up. And I was in a cafe the other day and a guy was sort of hopping from foot to foot, and he kept sort of shuffling to the back of the queue all the time. And as somebody came in, he would shuffle further and further back. And eventually he sort of got to the front and he said, would you mind refilling my water bottle? And he was kind of felt quite embarrassed and awkward about it. And this kind of legitimises that and hopefully drives a bit of trade for the participants too.
Fantastic.
64% of people that get a refill actually go back to that establishment again, and hopefully buy a piece of cake and a cup of coffee next time round.
Exactly.
But isn't it interesting that everything goes full circle? Because when I was a young lad growing up in Somerset, we had people that often used to pop in the door of my granddad's farm and say, can I have a bottle of water? And the old bottles had a sort of a ceramic top with a wire closure mechanism. And I can see, we used to have old tramps, for example, that used to wander around, do bits of farm work and then go on to the next one. And they were always popping in for water. And I think there may be some old English law where you probably have to give somebody water. And I know that public houses give you water, but they can charge you for the use of the glass. and that's how they got round it. And it's some royal charter going back to the year dot. But
well, most restaurants are obliged. Well, they are obliged to give you water, but don't we all feel a bit guilty when you're sitting down eating, and they come around? Would you like water, fizzy or still? And you feel obliged to buy a bottle of water, but really, we should take it from the tap.